It was the autumn of 1888 in London, and the city was a place of contrasts. The wealth of the British Empire poured into its heart, but in the East End, in the narrow streets of Whitechapel, misery was everywhere. Gas lamps flickered weakly over cobblestone alleys, where overcrowded tenements, poverty, disease, and crime created a world far removed from the grandeur of Westminster. It was here, in this cauldron of desperation, that a killer would emerge who would terrify the world and never be forgotten. The women of Whitechapel lived harsh lives. Many survived by selling sex for pennies, often returning to dark lodging houses where beds were rented by the night. Alcoholism, violence, and despair hung heavy over the district. It was among these women that the shadow first struck. On the morning of August 31st, 1888, the body of Mary Ann Nichols was discovered on Bucks Row. She was 43, destitute, and had spent her last night walking the streets in search of money for a bed. Her throat had been slashed twice, nearly severing her head, and her abdomen bore deep, vicious cuts. Police officers arriving at the scene were horrified, but in Whitechapel, death was not uncommon. Still, the brutality was unmistakable, far beyond the usual street violence. Just over a week later, on September 8th, another woman, Annie Chapman, was found murdered in the backyard of a house on Hanbury Street. Her throat was cut in the same manner, and her body mutilated. Parts of her organs were missing, taken by the killer in a manner suggesting anatomical knowledge. The press quickly connected the crimes, and the whispers of a monster stalking Whitechapel began to spread. The streets filled with fear. Women refused to walk alone at night. Police increased patrols, but the alleys were endless, and the shadows deep. Panic took root as it became clear that a serial murderer was at work. Newspapers seized on the story, eager for sensation. The lurid details of the killings sold copies, and soon the name Jack the Ripper would be born. But at this stage, he was simply a phantom haunting the poorest quarters of the city. Investigators struggled. Whitechapel was crowded with thousands of transients, immigrants, sailors, and the desperate poor. Witnesses contradicted each other, suspects came and went, and the killer left little evidence beyond his victims' mutilated bodies. Then came September 30th, 1888, the night that would be remembered as the double event. Just before 1 a.m., Elizabeth Stride's body was found in Dutfield's yard. Her throat was cut, but unlike the others, there were no abdominal mutilations. Some believed the killer had been interrupted before he could finish. Less than an hour later, only blocks away, Catherine Eddowes was discovered in Mitre Square. Her injuries were even more horrific. Her face slashed into grotesque wounds, her abdomen torn open, and organs removed with precision. On a nearby wall, written in chalk, was a message: "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Whether it was the killer's hand or not, the phrase fueled tensions in an area already divided by poverty and prejudice. The press now had a frenzy, and the public demanded answers. By the time of the double event, the police knew they faced something unlike any ordinary criminal. This was a killer who struck silently in crowded neighborhoods, escaped unseen, and left scenes of unimaginable savagery. Fear consumed Whitechapel. The poorest women, who had so little already, now carried the additional burden of terror. Each night, as fog rolled in and the gas lamps sputtered, they wondered if they would live to see the dawn. The killer's name was not yet fixed, but his legend was already being written in blood. By October 1888, London was consumed by fear. The newspapers reported every detail of the murders, feeding a public both horrified and fascinated. The killer now had a name, one he himself provided. On September 27th, the Central News Agency received a letter written in red ink, filled with mocking boasts. It was signed, for the first time, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." The name struck like lightning. Within days, every headline carried it, and the unknown murderer was given an identity that would echo for generations. The letter's authenticity was debated, but the impact was undeniable. The press used it to sensationalize the case, and Jack the Ripper became the most infamous figure in Britain. Soon more letters followed, hundreds in total, though most are believed to have been hoaxes written by journalists or attention seekers. But one stood out above all: the From Hell letter, delivered with a small box that contained half of a human kidney preserved in alcohol. The note, written in a crude, misspelled style, claimed the organ was taken from the body of Catherine Eddowes. Whether genuine or not, it chilled the public to the bone. As the autumn wore on, the killings escalated. On November 9th, the body of Mary Jane Kelly was discovered in her small room on Miller's Court. She was just 25 years old, younger than the previous victims, and her murder was the most horrific of them all. Her throat was cut, her face mutilated beyond recognition, and her body disemboweled, with organs placed around the room in a grotesque display. Detectives who entered the room were shaken for life. Even hardened officers described the scene as unlike anything they had ever witnessed. This was the last murder officially attributed to Jack the Ripper, but by then, the damage to London was already done. The East End was in uproar. Crowds gathered nightly, jeering at the police, demanding protection. Vigilante groups formed, patrolling the streets with clubs and whistles, determined to catch the killer themselves. The Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police, two separate forces with overlapping jurisdictions, clashed over authority, creating confusion and inefficiency. Detectives interviewed hundreds of suspects, from local butchers and doctors to sailors, immigrants and lunatics housed in asylums. Yet the killer moved unseen, leaving nothing but horror behind. The press capitalized on every rumor. Pamphlets were sold describing the killings in lurid detail. Sketches of suspects appeared on front pages. The phrase Jack the Ripper became shorthand for evil, and in taverns and marketplaces people whispered theories late into the night. Some blamed foreigners, especially Jewish immigrants, stoking racial tensions in Whitechapel. Others insisted the killer must be a surgeon, given the precision of the mutilations. Still others accused the upper classes, claiming that a gentleman was hunting the poor for sport. Conspiracy theories multiplied. Even as fear gripped the city, there was also a morbid fascination. Tourists visited Whitechapel hoping to glimpse the murder sites. Vendors sold postcards depicting the crimes. The East End became both a place of terror and a grotesque spectacle. The police, desperate to calm the public, offered rewards and increased patrols. Detectives like Inspector Frederick Aberline worked tirelessly, following endless leads, interrogating suspects, and searching lodging houses. Yet no arrest was ever made. Each time the public believed the killer might be cornered, the trail went cold again. The combination of brutal killings, mocking letters, and the inability of the authorities to stop him made Jack the Ripper into something more than a criminal. He was a phantom, an unstoppable force, a nightmare given human form. By the end of 1888, Whitechapel lived in a state of siege. The foggy streets, the dim glow of gas lamps, and the sound of footsteps in the night carried new meaning. Any woman who ventured out alone was a potential victim. Any man in the shadows could be the Ripper. And the world watched as London, the proud capital of empire, was humiliated by a killer it could not catch. The mystery of Jack the Ripper did not end with the killings of 1888. In many ways, it only began there. The inability of the police to catch the killer eroded public trust in authority and sparked one of the longest debates in criminal history. Who was Jack the Ripper? Over the years, hundreds of suspects have been named, ranging from the plausible to the absurd. Some pointed to Montague John Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher who drowned in the Thames shortly after the last murder. Others suspected Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant with documented mental illness who lived in Whitechapel and reportedly hated women. A century later, forensic evidence taken from a shawl allegedly belonging to Catherine Eddowes was claimed to show DNA linked to Kosminski, but the findings remain disputed. Another candidate was Michael Ostrog, a Russian-born thief and conman, or even Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, whose name became the center of royal conspiracy theories. Writers, journalists, and amateur sleuths have each put forward their own theories, turning the case into a cottage industry of speculation. Despite the suspects and endless debates, no definitive proof has ever emerged. The Ripper was a master of anonymity, blending into the teeming masses of London's East End and leaving behind only terror. What made the case endure was not just the savagery of the crimes, but the way it exposed the fractures of Victorian society. Whitechapel was a place of desperation, overcrowded with the poor and marginalized, and the Ripper's murders forced the wealthy and powerful to confront the misery at their doorstep. For the first time, the suffering of the slums was headline news, not out of compassion, but because of horror. Jack the Ripper became the dark mirror of a city proud of its empire but blind to its poverty. The cultural impact was immediate and lasting. Plays, penny dreadfuls, and pamphlets dramatized the killings even as they occurred. The Ripper entered folklore as a bogeyman, a symbol of lurking evil in urban life. Over the decades, books, films, and television shows turned the murders into legend. Each retelling added layers of myth, blurring the line between fact and fiction. Jack the Ripper was not just a killer. He became an archetype, the faceless predator in the fog. For criminologists, the case marked the birth of modern profiling. Investigators began considering the psychology of the killer, his methods, his rituals. The failure to catch him pushed police forces to modernize, leading to advances in forensic science and coordinated policing. For historians, the case revealed the anxieties of a society in transition, the fear of immigrants, the fear of the poor, the fear of urban anonymity. More than a century later, the fascination endures. Documentaries revisit the crime scenes, walking tours guide tourists through Whitechapel's alleys, and researchers still pore over autopsy reports and witness statements. Theories are published, DNA tests attempted, suspects named and dismissed. The Ripper continues to haunt, not because he was the first serial killer, but because he was never caught. His shadow stretches across time, a reminder of how evil can hide in plain sight and how mystery can outlive truth. Today, Whitechapel is transformed, its streets busy with markets, shops, and people from all over the world. Yet for those who know its history, the fog carries an echo. Somewhere in those alleys, in 1888, a man stalked, killed, and vanished. He left behind no name, only a legend. Jack the Ripper remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in criminal history, a puzzle that still taunts the living. And as long as his identity remains unknown, the story of Jack the Ripper will continue to terrify, fascinate, and remind us that sometimes the most frightening monsters are the ones we never see.